Hi guys, I'm Nyx, and today we're talking about 3D shapes, contour lines, shadows, and visualization. This video proceeds under the assumption that you can draw basic shapes, so if you can't draw basic shapes, go watch my last video, or if you're feeling adventurous, just grab a pencil and some paper and dive in. Before we get to that though, we're first going to talk about warm-ups. So some artists don't need to do warm-ups. They can just sit down at a piece of paper and just grab a pen and crank out whatever they want, but I'm definitely not like that. I find that drawing is a very specific headspace, and so I like to use warm-ups to get me into the mood. It also is really useful for like solidifying the facts and the things that you've learned and adding them, because as I make a warm-up, I am constantly adding more skills to it that I've acquired. So for this warm-up, we're just going to do basic shapes, since our last one was basic shapes. So bust out some triangles, just real quick and loose. Hold the pencil loosely, don't clutch it like you're trying to draw or like you're trying to write something. Triangles, squares, and circles. Do a few of them. Do some with like tapered edges. Do a circle. Do like round shapes that are all strange and messed up. Do some narrow rectangles. Some super narrow triangles. Just throw them together. It doesn't matter if they're perfect, don't even worry about it. And once you feel confident, like yes, I can draw basic shapes, I've learned how to do this, I feel a little warmed up as far as shapes go, we'll move on. Okay, 3D shapes. 3D shapes are really just a combination of a bunch of 2D shapes. So if you're going to draw a 3D shape from any angle, you have to have knowledge of perspective. And since perspective is such a big deal, and I'm going to have to dedicate an entire video to it, today just copy the squares and the cubes and stuff that I draw. You can just throw down a square like that. Today we're going to draw one at this angle. A pyramid is just a triangle with a line down the middle. And a sphere has the outline of a circle. Draw it a few times. Every single time you repeat something, you're just going to get better and better at it. It just takes practice. And so, after you draw this cube a few times, and this pyramid a few times, we're going to start thinking about where to throw the shadows. But before we do that, contour lines. Contour lines are super easy. They follow the contour of the object you are drawing, or any object in real life. Flat objects, or objects with flat sides, have flat contour lines. So a cube, that was a horrible cube. A cube will have contour lines that travel flat. A round object will have curved contour lines. Because the sides of a pyramid are flat, its contour lines will also be flat, and they will follow the direction that the object travels. Do a few of these. Draw your cubes and your spheres and your pyramids. Throw on some contour lines. Only these contour lines actually follow the direction that the cube is going. Okay. So, do those a couple times, and then look in your room, or the house that you're in, wherever you're at. Look at objects and try to imagine where the contour lines are on those objects. So if you're looking at you know, some manner of like dresser. And you know that the doors and everything on it are flat, then you know that the contour lines are flat. And these are all imaginary lines. You don't have to draw these. They can be super useful for like illustrating the direction a thing is traveling or showing you where to put your shadows. But really, once you play around with contour lines and you have an understanding of how they work, you don't have to draw them all the time. Most of the time, you won't be drawing them. So do that. Break down some objects in your house. Break it down into basic shapes. Add some contour lines to it. They always travel the direction in the shape of the object. Okay, shadows. So if you're drawing a cube, we can get hardcore into tones and different shadow tones and stuff, but that will be for another video. For this one, we're just going to use 3. We're going to use white for our light. We're going to use black for the edges of our cube. And we're going to use gray for the shadows. Now, if you're using a mechanical pencil, you can use the tip and draw a bunch of lines really close together and just sort of like scribble a little bit to get shadows. Or if you're using a pencil that isn't mechanical, that has the actual like cone-shaped tip, then you can tilt your pencil towards level with the page and use the side of it. This will give you a wider area and allow you to make shadows that blend rather than having these really harsh lines that travel through it. So before we get into how shadows work and where you put shadows, we're just going to play with it. Draw some cubes, color in some of the sides. You want the shadows that you're coloring in to be lighter than the edges, so you can always see the edges, at least for now. A circle, the shadows will follow the contour line. Okay, pyramid, draw your triangle, throw a line down the middle, pick a side, make it gray. Shade in this one, just for funsies, and just mess around a little bit. Draw some cubes, throw some shadows on it. Draw some spheres and some pyramids, pick a side, make it gray. After you've done this a few times, we can continue. So there are multiple parts to a shadow. You can make a whole list of them, but today we're just going to talk about the form shadow, the cast shadow, and the highlight. So a form shadow in art, a form is another way to refer to a 3D object. So a form shadow is the shadow that goes on the object. So all those shadows we were just drawing on the cube and on the spheres, those are form shadows. The shadow that's on the ground or on the wall that gets cast, that's called your cast shadow. And the light on the side that we're leaving light, those are your highlights. Now, what we're going to do is, rather than me drawing a cube and telling you how to copy it and where to put the shadows, I'm going to explain to you how shadows work. So with luck, you won't need a reference photo all the time, and you won't need to copy someone else's art constantly. You can just look at a situation and look at a drawing and understand, based on where the light is shining from, where the shadow goes naturally. People get so hung up on where does the shadow go? Where do I put it? How are shadows cast? And they have a really hard time figuring out how to do it. I also had a really hard time figuring it out. And then I realized that the reason I was having a hard time figuring it out is because I was thinking of shadows incorrectly. Rather than thinking about shadows as things, these things that are cast, think about them as the absence of light. So wherever light is, or shadows aren't. So if light is shining, wherever that light is shining, there are no shadows there. But as soon as there isn't light, that's where your shadows are. And this is because because we use light to see, we think of light as the default state of the universe. But light isn't the default state of the universe. The default state of the universe is dark. And suns are the things that generate your light. And suns are the things that create photons. And so photons travel in straight lines. They're just a type of energy trying to be released from a system because of like a thermodynamics, so they can balance themselves. And so you have these photons, these beams of light, traveling in straight lines at the speed of light until they hit an object and are either absorbed by it, reflected off of it, or transmitted through it, like in glass. So if you're thinking like this is a white page that we're looking at, and you're going to draw a cube on it. In reality, what this page actually looks like is that there's light everywhere, and that it's shining on all directions on the cube, and that when you darken it, let's say we darken these sides, and we put a shadow like over here, that this reads to your brain as, oh, the light's traveling from this direction, because light and shadows are really how you determine the three-dimensionality of an object, along with contour lines. But what you should actually do is color in a whole spot on your white page dark. And then use your eraser to draw a cube. Okay, and now imagine, since the light is coming from this direction, it's going to push all of the shadows, wherever the light is, away from it. So this whole section gets erased. Because there's light there. And there's light all right here. And there's light on the other side of it. So the shadow doesn't go on forever. And so what you have left is the shape of the object and the shadow. And this still isn't totally accurate because you're using an eraser, but it's more accurate than imagining that the shadows are a thing that are being shined somewhere, or that the shadow is cast. Shadows are everywhere. Shadows are everywhere that there's no light. So draw your cube. Pick a direction of the light. Let's say the light's coming from here. And then we know that this side is going to be gray because it's not in direct light. This side will be gray because it's not in direct light. And then because there's a whole bunch of light right here, and there's a whole bunch of light right here, and right here, this is the direction the light is shining from, that this cube is now blocking where the light's coming from. And since it's blocking the direction of the light, the shadows go in the opposite. See, and it reads. It makes sense. And if you were to turn this light off, and then everything goes back to being completely black. If there's no light in a room, you can't see anything. There's no color, there's no shapes, there's no way to define. You have to have light to be able to observe things. At least in that sense. Okay? So, light is not the default, darkness is the default state of the universe, and light is the thing. Shadows go everywhere that there's no light. So if you find yourself going, oh, I can't figure out where to put the shadow, ask yourself, where's the light? And so now, armed with that knowledge, draw some more cubes. Throw in some shadow. Think about what direction the light's coming from. Think about wherever there is light, and anywhere that there is not light, put shadow. And it will look right every time. On a sphere, think of where the contour lines are. Put your gray for your shadow. And then think, oh, the light's coming from this direction, and the ball is blocking it right here. And now you know, like, there's a bunch of light shining this way, and a bunch of light shining this way, and all up here, but it's not directly on the other side of it, because it's being obscured. Just like a really quick and dirty way to think about it. So once you've messed around with this a little bit, then look around your room and look at all the shadows. Look at the shadows that are cast. Bonus points if you can grab a lamp and actually set it up and start putting objects in front of the light and look at the way the shadows look. Because most art, everything except for abstract art, is an imitation of 3D reality. These are all just illusions. You study 3D reality to understand how to draw it. So as important as practicing on paper is, it's also important to look at the real world. Which brings us to our next point, visualization. So there's all these different skills that an artist can learn. Everything from foreshortening to line weight to color theory, and how you choose, what skills you choose to learn and what skills you choose to employ determine what your style is. You hear a lot of people talking about like, oh, how do I find my style? And a lot of the ways you find your style is just by broadening your horizons, adding more skills to your wheelhouse, and deciding what skills you use. One of those skills is visualization. Some artists don't require it, like abstract artists who like to just chaotically throw paint. They don't want to imagine a scene, they want to create art on the fly. And that's fine, but I am not that type of artist. I think that abstract art is useful to add certain feelings to certain pieces, but there are situations where visualization is required. You don't want to have to look at a reference photo all of the time for your entire life. So if you can truly visualize something, then you can draw it from any angle. But the only way to exercise your visualization skills are to actually close your eyes and imagine things. So play around with your imagination. Imagine giant cities and cities in the clouds, and think about tidal waves that go so high into the sky that you can't see anything on the other side of them. Think about holding a small ball in your hand, and then imagine that that ball gets bigger and bigger, and then imagine what it looks like from space if it's the size of a planet. Think about all kinds of ridiculous, anything you can imagine or visualize will just increase your skills. If you find yourself trying to imagine what a cube looks like from every angle, and you're like, God, I'm having a hard time imagining this, then that's what you should start thinking about. Don't be afraid to spend some time trying to really think about how something appears. It will only ever help you. And so, if we're going to get into like some exercises at the end of this, as we approach the end of it, these exercises should be to practice drawing your 3D shapes. Before eventually you'll be drawing them from all sorts of angles. But for now, just practice drawing the ones that we've done. and then throw some shadows on it. Think about where the light is. But more than any of that practice, as nice as that is, for this next week, just spend time looking in real life. Look at where shadows are. Look at objects in the world and break them down into basic 3D shapes. So if you're looking at a dresser and you're like, oh, that's just a bunch of rectangles. Or if you're looking at a trash can and you're like, oh, that's just sort of like a little trapezoid with an oval at the top. And just think about the fact that shadows are everywhere that there isn't light. Dedicate a week to thinking about shadows, and you won't have the problem of never knowing where shadows go and always having to look at reference photos. Beyond that, I'll see you next week. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope this was informative and not too swift, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Thank you so much.